עיתונאית בריטית תוקפת את BBC בשידור חי על תמיכתם בחמאס. אתם חייבים לראות את זה.
Let's talk about the BBC. It's never a good thing when we're talking about the BBC, is it? Even though Gary Lineker has left. No, it is still an organisation that is, I mean, let's face it, institutionally anti-Semitic, because that's the only explanation really for why BBC presenters, reporters, producers, editors seem to take the word of the Hamas terrorists as gospel every single time they claim anything or report anything over and above the evidence before their eyes and ears and indeed what they are told by the democratic elected Israeli government. I think we should be questioning everything that we are told in any war by anybody, but particularly when the terrorists tell us one thing. Well, let's talk about this right now with Jake Wallace-Simons, who's author of Israelophobia, the newest version of the oldest hatred, and what to do about it. Very good morning to you, Jake.
Good morning.
This story is particularly in the news, and I do want you to help explain what the different sides have claimed in just a couple of moments. But this is particularly over food distribution, aid distribution in Gaza, carried out by a charity sort of basically funded and organised, set up by the Israelis, against the advice, the agreement of the UN and everyone else. And claims from Hamas, because any claim coming out of the Gaza Strip is always something authorised by Hamas. You can't get your information out otherwise, in which they have claimed that IDF soldiers opened fire on civilians going to aid and basically, you know, a massacre or two. Who knows how many they've claimed so far. Let's have a little watch and a listen to what Caroline Leavitt, who is, of course, the White House press secretary for the US President Donald Trump, had to say yesterday when she was asked at the White House by a reporter about Israeli forces firing on Palestinians trying to get aid from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The Red Cross and others were reported to have said that up to 20 people had arrived at a hospital with gunshot wounds. And she asked what was being done to address this situation. And this is what the press secretary had to say.
The administration is aware of those reports, and we are currently looking into the veracity of them because, unfortunately, unlike some in the media, we don't take the word of Hamas with total truth. We like to look into it when they speak. Unlike the BBC, who had multiple headlines, they wrote, Israeli tank kills 26, Israeli tank kills 21, Israeli gunfire kills 31, Red Cross says 21 people were killed in an aid incident, and then, oh wait, they had to correct and take down their entire story, saying we reviewed the footage and couldn't find any evidence.
Clear that this was something that Caroline Leavitt was planning to say, but Jake Wallace-Simons, take us back a little bit to these initial claims and counterclaims and where we stand and what the BBC has actually said and done.
Well, from the BBC's point of view, they've just been reporting a breaking news story as they see it. Initially, the claims came out saying that an Israeli tank had killed more than 30 people. And then as more details began to emerge, that figure was downgraded. It became murky. There was a variety of conflicting sources, local sources on the ground, which read Hamas. The Red Cross got involved. And in the end, it turned out that Israel hadn't massacred anybody at all. And it was a bit of a debacle. But I think that the thing is, from the BBC's point of view, they're doing their best. They're just dealing with the information that's coming to them. But the problem is they're in the habit of taking information that comes from disreputable sources seriously. You know, there was research that was done by Andrew Fox at the Henry Jackson Society. I know he's one of your guests, regular guests here, a few months ago, which showed that only 5% of broadcasters actually cite Israeli figures. Yeah. 95% do not cite any Israeli figures at all. And that's really key, because if you're going to be believing Hamas, and of course that's very problematic in itself, but let's say you do, you also do need to be believing our democratic ally Israel. Now, of course, Israel takes a bit more time with its figures because it actually goes through the evidence and tries to get you something that's accurate rather than just pulling a figure out of the air. I mean, the fact that people believe that Hamas can come out with a figure of an exact, 31 people dead within 5 minutes.
I'm always stunned by that. I mean, we have events that happen here, and even with all our CCTV and rule of law and order, it takes. I mean, we didn't know how many had been injured in the Liverpool incident for days.
And nobody asks the obvious questions. That's the thing. I mean, with the Iraq war, we still don't know how many people were killed. The estimates vary within a couple of 100,000. And yet there's a strike in Gaza. There's chaos. There's war. There's blood. There's dust. There's panic. And suddenly, 31 people exactly. And no one asks why that could be the case. And so you end up with the BBC, it's not that they're lying, but they're believing liars and they're projecting it to the world. And that's where all this comes from.
And it's particularly dangerous when the BBC does it because it is such a trusted news source around the world and in particular in the Middle East. And people can say, well, the BBC is saying it. And they've done this again and again. And what's interesting, they've done it again and again, despite often being shown that the information, proven that the information they've had is actually untrue. Go all the way back to, the start when we had a claim again from doctors and others and humanitarian sources that there had been a strike, an Israeli strike on a hospital. And it turned out there wasn't a strike on a hospital, it was a hospital car park, but also that it wasn't from an Israeli missile. It was actually, it looks like it was Hamas missiles that had misfired and come down. The figures are often given are very questionable. There have been plenty of videos that have come out. Again, you don't see this on the BBC or Sky or ITV, but BBC is the worst offender. We have to pay for it after all, where numerous claims have been debunked. There are videos where they literally film propaganda videos, right? Literally action, watching people running forward and claiming, they're fleeing protesters. I mean, in this particular case, there are lots of different videos. There is a video that's done the rounds claiming that, well, look, here are Hamas fighters opening fire on people. The BBC and other organisations say they debunked that and said this wasn't from near this aid distribution site in Rafah. But then the actual aid organisation themselves, this is what are they called? The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that they released footage, from cameras over a 15-minute period at the time when we were told there had been this attack by IDF soldiers, showing no issue whatsoever, no gunfire, people queuing up in fairly orderly fashion to get their aid. That should have debunked those claims, shouldn't it? And yet, I don't think most people even know about that video.
No, because the BBC ignored it. They didn't bother.
They didn't say either, well, look, this side are claiming this, but this side is claiming this, with this evidence.
Yes, exactly. And the problem is that I think with the BBC, it's not they're trying to lie. They've got confirmation bias, that in their minds, Israel is the bad guys carrying out a genocide, although they're not allowed to say that because it's not, but that's how they feel. And Hamas are the resistance. Again, they're not allowed to say it, but that's how they tend to feel. Yep. And so that confirmation bias, even if they're trying to be impartial, just comes through all the time. Whenever they make a mistake, it always falls in one direction and not in the other. But at the moment, I think it's important that people know this. We're in a propaganda tornado at the moment, coming from the other side, if I may say, call it that, which I think I should. And the reason is that Israel is close to winning. And the reason it's close to winning is that it's tackling the issue of aid. All of this propaganda is attracted to the issue of aid. And the reason is that until now, the UN has been bringing in the aid. Hamas, the UN is compromised by Hamas. Many of the UN, 1,200 of them, actually are members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad. Hamas takes the aid from the UN and then sells it, not gives it. It was given to them, but they sell it to the Palestinians, making money to pay their terrorist army. What's happening now is that Israel is saying, no more of this. We're giving the aid ourselves with the Americans for free. Gazans were filmed being astonished that actually we're getting it for free now. And Hamas has no longer got the money to pay its fighters or to maintain its control. And Hamas is panicking. That's why you're seeing demonstrations in Gaza against Hamas. That's why you're seeing armed groups now in Rafah in the south coming out against Hamas. They published a joint statement, some local families and clans just earlier today saying they were going to be standing against Hamas because Hamas is weakening its grip. And the reason is that Israel is cutting off its aid as well as pursuing it militarily.
And there's been
that's why this propaganda effort is an overdrive to stop that happening from the UN and from Hamas.
And that's interesting because as soon as Israel said they didn't want, there was aid coming in, they wanted to be basically in control of it themselves. Their criticisms were, thick and fast from aid organisations and from, all the usual suspects at UN and indeed our own government. I say with great shame that this is our government and the stance they're taking. This idea, but aid shouldn't be based on the war aims of getting people south. These aid distribution centres are in the south, not in the north where lots of people are. But the whole point is they do want people to move to the south. But it's not the job of a nation that has been attacked that they have to feed the opposing population. They are effectively at war with the country of Gaza, but they're offering to feed those people. I don't remember us offering to feed any of the people when we've been at war with them. But here's the thing. I put out a tweet the other day, and it was fascinating how many people didn't get the purpose of my tweet, but hey, that's Twitter for you. What would be the motive for Israeli troops to fire on innocent civilians coming to get aid from food hubs, you know, basically where they've been criticised providing these food hubs, there would be no motive that I could see for the Israelis to do that, although they have said some soldiers opened fire, warning shots to people who approached them, refused to move away. Yeah, I mean, whether they had arms or not, that's clearly a threat to IDF soldiers. That would be normal form in warfare. But there is a clear motive for Hamas, as you say, to make those claims. And so many of the claims don't match with each other. Doctors saying it was gunshot wounds, but the initial claim saying it was a tank firing. Well, which was it?
Exactly. People just aren't asking the obvious questions. I mean, really, you know, why would Israel go to all the effort of providing aid to Gazan civilians only to shoot them when they arrive to pick them up?
And they know the bad publicity they'll get.
Just skip the aid bit and shoot them if that's what you really want to do. If you want to do genocide, just do the genocide. Don't bother feeding these people and trying to evacuate them before attacks.
Jeremy Bowen on the BBC the other day said, look, but the key thing is we have to rely on the sources within the Gaza Strip because Israel will not allow independent journalists to enter the Gaza Strip. And he said, and he actually said some words along to this effect, something like, and the only reason I can think they would do that is they don't want us to see what's going on. That's the only motive. Why aren't journalists allowed in the Gaza Strip?
Well, I mean, journalists in previous conflicts in Gaza have been allowed into the Gaza Strip, and immediately they've been provided with a minder by Hamas, steered to propaganda. I mean, you think the propaganda now is bad. With journalists there working hand in hand with Hamas on the ground, it becomes even worse. They're taken to see, quote unquote, civilian disasters and massacres and never see any Hamas fighters killed or wounded and so on and so forth. And we've seen that over the years again and again. In fact, in 2014, there was an interesting, I don't know if you remember this, there was an interesting moment when an Indian film crew in Gaza during the conflict there happened to see a Hamas fighter shooting a rocket from just outside the hotel, which normally they weren't allowed to see. Hamas wouldn't let any journalists film that. They filmed it through the window, broadcast it, and it took the world by storm because nobody'd ever seen Hamas fighting before. And so, you know, that's the sort of coverage we would be getting from the Strip if journalists were allowed in. And of course, Israel doesn't want to kill any journalists. Now, look, personally, I think journalists should be allowed in. I would quite like to go in and do some coverage myself, and I would like that to be the case. But I can understand why Israel feels, you know what, we're going to be screwed either way, whether we let you in or whether we don't. So why don't we just keep it this way?
No, I'm sure you'd be taken hostage very, very quickly. That's the only other worry as well. Jake Willis-Simons, thank you so much. You've been such an important figure in covering all of this. I really appreciate you.